In just the past few weeks around Pokrovsk, dozens of small Russian approach groups have stalled or stopped outright before reaching the main defensive line. The losses are not marked by cratered fields or burning armor columns. They appear instead as broken vehicles, delayed resupply runs, and units forced to turn back after brief contact. The cause is not artillery or airstrikes. It is a quiet pairing of Ukrainian snipers and FPV reconnaissance that is reshaping movement on the ground. These are not headline battles that redraw maps overnight. Yet the damage is steady and cumulative. Advance windows close. Supply plans slip. Commanders are pushed to change routes and behavior while still under pressure. What looks like empty ground behind the front line is no longer neutral space. It is watched space, where every step can be seen, timed, and locked. The risk here goes beyond casualty counts. Once rear areas lose their sense of safety, tempo collapses. Small delays spread forward. Larger pushes lose coordination. For Ukraine, the payoff is clear. Holding Pokrovsk does not require large assaults if pressure can be applied earlier and farther out, at a lower cost. The unanswered question is how this is happening with such consistency. How can FPVs and a single well-timed shot halt movement without a major fight? And what does this pattern signal for the next phase of the war around Pokrovsk? Pokrovsk has turned into a tactical flashpoint because it sits on a narrow link between active fighting in eastern Donetsk and the support routes behind it, which means any force trying to keep pressure on the front must pass close to this area. Control here does not look like a single breakthrough or a dramatic push. It appears instead as constant movement, short advances, and repeated attempts to probe the same ground without drawing heavy fire. In recent weeks, Russian forces have shifted towards small approach groups rather than large formations, with infantry moving in low numbers along forest edges, dirt tracks, and damaged villages. These routes offer partial cover from direct observation and allow units to test defenses without committing too much manpower at once. The goal is not to rush forward but to feel out the space, find weak points, and prepare the ground for follow-on movement. These groups rarely move in a straight line or on a fixed schedule, because progress is broken into short segments separated by pauses. Soldiers advance a short distance, stop to listen and watch, then wait for cues from nearby units before moving again. Each pause is meant to reduce risk, but it also creates predictable moments where movement must resume, which exposes the group in the same places again and again. As this pattern repeats, Russian infantry movement around Pokrovsk begins to follow a recognizable routine rather than a single push. Small groups leave cover at different hours, often before dusk or just after first light, moving along forest edges and broken roads to avoid clear sightlines. Progress is slow and deliberate. Soldiers advance in short bounds, stop to listen, then regroup behind natural cover or ruined structures before moving again. The intent is not to seize ground quickly, but to probe the space ahead and test how far movement is possible without drawing a response. Once such a spot is reached, the group often holds briefly, observes, and then withdraws or shifts sideways rather than pushing deeper. The goal is information. Where movement feels safe, where it slows, where it becomes exposed. Over several days, these efforts stack on top of each other. Different groups use the same paths because alternatives add time or break coordination with nearby units. A bend in a dirt road, a gap between destroyed buildings, or a narrow strip of open ground becomes unavoidable. This turns Pokrovsk from a rear area into a zone of constant low-level contact. There is no single moment that defines the front. Instead, multiple small advances overlap. One group halts while another begins moving. A third waits for confirmation that a route is usable before stepping out. Everything depends on timing rather than mass, which means any interruption spreads outward. At the same time, Ukrainian teams are not reacting blindly. FPV drone crews observe these movements quietly, often from long range, without engaging. They track routes used, note where groups pause, and record how often the same paths are tested. Over days, a clear sequence forms. When Russian infantry tends to move, where it must slow down, which crossings cannot be avoided. FPV reconnaissance has become the first layer of contact management around Pokrovsk because it allows Ukrainian units to see movement long before a fight begins, without forcing the situation to escalate. These drones are launched early, often when the ground is still quiet and no unit has revealed its presence. They fly low and slow, following terrain lines so closely that they blend into the visual noise of trees, fields, and shattered buildings. FPV crews avoid high altitude or wide sweeps. Instead, the drone is guided just above treetops, along dirt roads, or parallel to forest edges, keeping the camera pointed toward likely approach routes. From this position, Russian infantry groups are observed as they leave cover in small numbers. What appears careful and concealed from the ground becomes readable from above once movement unfolds over time. As groups advance, FPV operators watch the rhythm rather than the individuals. A slight change in walking speed, a brief stop near a ditch, or a subtle tightening of spacing between soldiers becomes noticeable when tracked for several minutes. These small details begin to form a behavioral outline. The drone does not rush closer. It keeps distance, avoiding sharp turns or sudden drops that might alert the group below. FPV operators do not treat the first sighting as a trigger. The purpose is to stay invisible long enough to understand intent. Time is used to study how the group reacts to environmental cues. Light conditions play an important role. In early morning or late afternoon, infantry often trust shadows and broken light to mask movement. From above, those same shadows outline bodies against dirt tracks and open strips. Motion stands out even when spacing is wide. The drone does not need to identify faces or equipment. It only needs to follow movement as it unfolds. As observation continues, repetition begins to appear. Groups slow at the same bends. They pause near the same tree lines. These moments are shaped by terrain rather than choice. Each pause is captured by the FPV camera in real time. Live feed is shared with units positioned further ahead along likely routes. The goal is not constant communication, but shared awareness. Ukrainian sniper team need timing and direction. The drone provides that by staying with Russian group instead of jumping between targets. The absence of immediate attack deepens uncertainty. The group knows it may have been seen, but nothing happens. This delay stretches nerves and breaks confidence. Every step forward feels heavier because the next move is unclear. The drone shapes behavior without ever firing. As the approach continues, FPV observation turns movement into a timing problem. An open strip of ground is no longer measured by distance alone. It is measured by when the group must cross to stay coordinated. A narrow gap between buildings becomes a moment that cannot be delayed forever. Once that moment is identified, the FPV holds position. It does not guide fire. It does not close in. It simply confirms commitment. When the group steps into a space that cannot be bypassed without delay or confusion, the drone remains steady and watches. At this stage, the value of FPV is patience. It transforms scattered movement into a readable sequence. The next step becomes predictable before it happens. Control is established without noise. By the time the group reaches the edge of open ground, the outcome has already been shaped. Detection has turned into exposure. The drone has completed its role, and the situation is ready to shift from observation to interruption. Once FPV observation confirms that a Russian group has entered a space with a clear firing lane, snipers become the active element that turns monitoring into disruption. This moment does not arrive suddenly. It follows minutes or hours of tracking where movement, spacing, and direction have already been read. By the time the sniper engages, the approach is no longer uncertain, it is committed. The first shot is chosen for effect rather than volume, because the goal is not to wipe out the group, but to break its internal rhythm. Targets are selected based on position and behavior, with attention given to the individual who sets pace or signals movement. When that figure is hit, the group does not simply lose a soldier, it loses timing. The immediate reaction is almost always the same. Movement stops at once. Some soldiers drop to the ground. Others rush toward the nearest cover. A few hesitate, unsure whether to freeze or move. This pause is not coordinated because it was not planned. It is a forced response to sudden loss under open conditions. That forced pause matters more than the casualty itself. The group was moving according to a sequence that assumed continued progress. Once that sequence breaks, every following action becomes reactive. Communication slows. Signals become unclear. Orders that were meant to guide the next step arrive too late or not at all. During these seconds, the group is no longer advancing. It is stabilizing. Soldiers scan tree lines, ruined walls, and distant edges, trying to identify the source of fire. The problem is not lack of effort, but lack of information. The shot came from a direction that was not visible moments earlier, which means the ground they trusted has failed them. Even a short halt is enough to cause wider disruption. Units moving behind expect progress ahead. When the lead group stops, spacing collapses or stretches unpredictably. Some elements slow down to avoid contact. Others bunch up without realizing it. The entire flow of movement begins to lose shape. This is where the first shot reshapes the fight. No follow-up volley is required to create impact. The damage comes from uncertainty spreading outward. Commanders further back receive incomplete reports. The situation ahead sounds unclear rather than decisive. As a result, instructions become cautious instead of assertive. The terrain around Pokrovsk amplifies this effect. Open strips between cover cannot be crossed quickly once the group is pinned by fear of another unseen shot. Remaining in place feels unsafe, yet moving forward feels worse. Time passes while no ground is gained, and that lost time cannot be recovered. The sniper does not need to keep firing to maintain control. The possibility of another shot is enough to hold attention. Soldiers stay low. Heads turn upward and outward. Weapons point in too many directions at once. The group remains intact, but its function is paused. That pause breaks coordination with other approach elements. A nearby group that was meant to advance in parallel now faces a choice without guidance. Push forward and risk isolation, or wait and lose momentum. Either option slows the overall plan. What makes this tactic effective is not surprise alone. It is the way a single interruption cascades through timing and trust. The first shot turns movement into hesitation and hesitation into delay. In a fight where progress depends on rhythm rather than mass, that delay is decisive. By the time the group regains enough confidence to move again, conditions have changed. Light has shifted. Observation continues. Pressure remains. After the first shot breaks the advance rhythm, FPV presence becomes the main source of pressure that holds the situation in place. The drone does not leave once contact is made. It stays above the area at a safe distance, steady and patient, watching how the group reacts rather than trying to force a quick outcome. From above, FPV tracks the immediate responses on the ground. Soldiers try to pull a wounded teammate toward cover, often moving in short bursts and stopping again when fear returns. Others search for a place to regroup, looking for terrain that feels less exposed, even if it offers no real protection. A few attempt to scan tree lines and building edges by eye, hoping to catch a flash or a shadow that explains where the shot came from. None of these actions restore momentum. Each move is cautious and disconnected from the next. FPV records every shift in posture and spacing, which means the group cannot test options without being seen. A step forward, a crawl to the side, or a short dash between cover all become visible patterns rather than private decisions. This constant observation creates a new problem for the group. It is no longer clear which direction carries less risk. Staying in place feels dangerous because another shot could come at any moment. Moving forward feels worse because the open ground ahead has already proven unsafe. Pulling back also carries cost, since retreat exposes movement and signals failure to units behind. As time passes, the group becomes fixed in place. Communication turns inward as soldiers talk among themselves, rather than receiving clear guidance from above. Hand signals replace movement. Weapons remain raised but unfocused, covering too many angles at once to be effective. FPV presence shapes this behavior without firing a single round. The drone does not need to attack to influence decisions. Its value lies in persistence. As long as it stays overhead, uncertainty stays alive. The group knows it is being watched, yet cannot tell how that information will be used next. This pressure affects more than the pinned unit. Groups approaching from behind begin to notice the lack of progress ahead. They slow down earlier than planned or stop entirely to avoid running into the same situation. The distance between elements grows uneven, which makes coordination harder and timing unreliable. In some cases, leaders decide that waiting longer offers no benefit. Orders are given to pull back to the last covered position, not because the route ahead is blocked by force, but because confidence has collapsed. That withdrawal is careful and slow, with frequent pauses to check surroundings, which further extends the delay. Other times, the group remains in place longer than intended, hoping conditions will improve. Light fades. Fatigue sets in. Stress builds as the sense of exposure continues without resolution. The window for movement closes gradually rather than suddenly. What makes this sequence effective is its quiet nature. There is no loud exchange of fire to mark the moment of defeat. The setback happens through hesitation and time loss. FPV turns minutes into pressure, and pressure into stalled movement. By the time the drone finally leaves the area, the damage has already been done. The group has either fallen back or lost the chance to advance as planned. Units behind must adjust routes and schedules, which spreads disruption across the approach corridor. When small Russian approach groups are stopped early, the effect spreads well beyond that single contact point and begins to shape how the entire operation unfolds. A halted movement does not simply pause one unit. It forces the surrounding plan to bend and stretch in real time, often without clear direction. Around Pokrovsk, this pattern has repeated so often that delay itself has become part of the battlefield environment. After a lead group fails to advance, commanders cannot immediately push the next element forward. The ground ahead has already changed character. Routes that were assumed to be usable now feel exposed, even if no additional fire follows. Before any follow-up move can begin, time is spent reassessing paths, spacing, and timing. That pause breaks the sequence the plan depended on, and the lost momentum does not return later. Units positioned behind sense this shift first. Movement slows earlier than planned, sometimes well before reaching the expected contact point. Some groups stop and wait for confirmation that never comes. Others step forward too soon, then freeze when they realize adjacent elements are no longer in place. The approach loses its shape as coordination weakens. As this unfolds, logistics is pulled into the same uncertainty. Supply vehicles and escorts delay departure or hold at staging areas, waiting for signals that routes are safe. When confirmation does not arrive, routes are changed or movements postponed. Even brief interruptions disrupt resupply, because these runs depend on narrow time windows rather than constant flow. At the tactical level, Ukrainian teams exploit this hesitation with quiet precision. FPV drones continue to observe stalled areas, while sniper elements remain positioned along likely follow-on routes. In some sectors, larger caliber rifles such as the Snipex Alligator are brought forward. Designed primarily for engaging equipment like transport vehicles or light armored platforms, these weapons are used selectively against personnel when conditions allow. Their range and impact extend the zone of risk without requiring repeated shots. The combination of FPV observation and sniper fire creates a silent chain of action. Movement is detected early, tracked over time, and then interrupted at a moment when reversal is costly. There is no need for heavy fire or direct clashes. The effect comes from timing and positioning rather than volume. Command decisions begin to reflect this pressure. Reports from the field describe uncertainty instead of progress. Orders shift toward caution, emphasizing loss avoidance over forward gain. What was intended as probing activity turns into holding by default, with pressure flattening instead of building. Over time, behavior changes. Units begin to expect interruption before they even move. Preparation slows. Soldiers spend more time scanning and less time advancing. Each step forward is treated as a risk calculation rather than a routine task. The campaign does not collapse in a dramatic moment. It wears down quietly through repetition. Attempts look similar day after day and end the same way, with short advances followed by delay. This chain reaction does not require high casualty counts. It relies on friction and disrupted timing. Ground is tested repeatedly but rarely held with confidence. Control shifts away from who can push farthest and toward who can keep the other side from moving at all. What is unfolding around Pokrovsk makes one thing clear. Modern war is no longer decided only by large assaults or dramatic breakthroughs. It is shaped by control of timing and space at the smallest level, where a single pause can matter more than a kilometer gained. Across this area, advances did not fail because of overwhelming firepower. They slowed because rhythm collapsed. Small groups were seen early. Progress was interrupted at key moments. Pressure stayed in place even when weapons fell silent. Over time, those small interruptions stacked up and pushed entire plans off schedule. If this model keeps expanding, Russian forces may face a hard choice. Either commit more troops and protection to every small move, or accept slower pressure with fewer chances to build momentum. Both paths carry cost, and neither offers an easy answer. The balance between speed, safety, and control is shifting, and that shift is happening quietly. The bigger question is how long this approach can hold. Will FPV coverage and sniper pressure continue to shape every attempt, or will countermeasures change the pattern again? Will adaptation come through new tactics or through higher risk tolerance on the ground? That answer has not arrived yet. If this analysis brought value, support the work by hitting like, sharing the video, and subscribing to Military Force. Stay tuned for clear and grounded battlefield breakdowns you can trust.